Welcome to Through the Corporate Glass, a podcast that explores career choices. We dive into the latest trends in tech careers, demystify industry roles, spotlight startups, and even explore unconventional paths outside the industry. Join us for authentic conversations that will challenge your assumptions and inspire you to think differently.
Hi everyone, I am Deepa, your host for today's episode. In our career journey, we come across people who have worked across technology and domain boundaries. Have you wondered what it takes to do that? To talk about this, I have with me Ashwini. Ashwini Vasanth is a staff engineer at Nutanix. She has over 16 years of experience riding the wave of many technology trends and being at the forefront of some of them. Welcome to the show, Ashwini.
Thank you so much, Deepa.
Ashwini, you are a telecom engineer and your first job was with a networking company. Was it like how you imagined it would be after college?
Absolutely not. So, you're right. I did start my journey with a networking company. And interestingly, there was one subject called digital signal processing that I did as part of my telecom engineering course. And I decided that I would do anything other than that. And, one of my biggest learnings from my first job was never say never. What I end up working on is exactly that. So I was working on digital signal processing, working on some parts of the networking, switching logic as well. But I think it wasn't anything that I expected to work on. But that said, I think the pleasant surprise was that I learned to actually like digital signal processing, and I realized that the theoretical aspects that we learn are very different when they're actually applied to developing a product.
So you ended up actually liking it.
That's true. Yeah.
Yeah, I know. So you were there for about 2, 3 years, I think, in that
Yes.
role.
Yes. I spent around 3 years working on various networking projects and technologies.
Right. And and after that, I know that you shifted to working with mobile handsets. So how did you choose your focus area? Is that something that you came across at work and then picked it up?
Yeah, so I was actually working on this interesting project, which was to suppress silence in speech. So when we actually have a conversation, we have a lot of silence which is interspaced between our speech. And when you send this information to a base station, so thinking about a mobile phone communication, when you send it to the base station, we were actually consuming the same amount of bandwidth to send silence as we were consuming to send speech. So it sounded like it was a waste of bandwidth, waste of network bandwidth, and we needed to optimize that in some way. And while I was working on that project, I was working more on the network side of the world and the base station side of the world. And then I got interested on the mobile phone technologies. And I was just curious about how the mobile phone actually worked and how that end of the story played out. And that's how I ended up exploring this field, and I got into the world of radio frequency transceivers and mobile phone development. So purely exploratory at that point.
Right. And that involves working a lot in labs, right?
Yes, so that came as a bit of a surprise, to be honest, because I didn't actually know what the day in a life of a radio frequency transceiver engineer would actually be. Right. So I went into it with the assumption that my software development background would just be directly applicable, and I would be basically just writing code and algorithms, but just at a different layer. So it was a very different world.
I know. So the reason I bring that up is, see, if I look at your career journey, you have moved, you explored a new area, and then you actually moved from working in labs to working on, software or application centric roles. And so, how do you identify and pick up the skills that you need for these experiences?
I think the way I've gone about it is twofold. So, one part of it was that I intentionally wanted to explore in different areas, essentially, of the product development. And the way I made the transition out of working closer to the hardware to something which is more application centric is I got into a project, and specifically, this was around building content delivery networks, which is essentially a technology to make video delivery more optimal and easier to watch Netflix, if you would, right? Like optimize the way to develop Netflix in some sense. And this project involved both hardware interfaces. It was part of a network router which was actually built in specialized hardware, and it also had a lot of application centric pieces, like working on the HTTP protocol and having an HTTP server and client and so on. So I was able to move through different aspects within this project. And then that gave me a broader view, and it helped me move to the application side of the world. And I think basically what it comes down to is you would need to find common skills that are applicable in a new domain area, and probably slowly make your way through adjacent areas.
Right. And I think the key is, uh, how do you identify the different uh, areas you can explore? I think that involves spending time on reading and seeing what's out there.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. So that actually does come into the picture a lot when you're trying to explore a completely new domain or an area. I guess after my initial foray in the application space with the CDN, I decided to move into software defined networking. And the way that happened was there was a paper published on OpenFlow and just exploring the whole concept of software defined networking, which was just emerging. And after reading the paper and getting a sense of what it actually involved, it became clear that this was something which was here to stay. And I guess a bit of it is instinct, but also I had a way to directly map my experience to this new world in some sense.
Right.
And yeah, I think that's probably one way of identifying new areas. In today's world, there are a lot of open source programming projects which help us explore these areas deeper. So, for example, even with SDN, I mean, of course, when it was starting out, the open source project was very nascent and it was just in its initial stages. But it gives you a good preview of the overall technology, and it helps you learn different aspects, play around with it. So that's a great way as well to pick up skills.
Yeah, these are really critical points, Ashwini, in the sense we get so consumed by what we do in our daily role, right? That we don't spend time to see what's out there, to invest time on learning. Like the open source projects you mentioned, that will have a wealth of information out there for us to explore.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And talking through your journey so far, I think it would have, by this time it would have been over a decade in the industry, and then now you're working on, cloud networking. So does it get harder as you gain more experience?
Yeah, it certainly does. So I think one thing with experience is that you're not hired anymore with your potential in mind, right? You have to actually bring value to the table on day one. Like your interview needs to reflect the value that you bring, and I guess the expertise as well. So it does get much harder.
I can see that, I know. So once you look at this in the context of, say, career growth. So when you move across different spaces or domains, is it like going back to beginning? How do you look at it when you see, okay, has my career growth been okay with all of this?
So, career growth is actually something which could get a little tricky because uh, if you're looking at something which is a direct map where you can say, "Hey, I have 15 years of experience in this particular narrow field," and then there is no questioning whether I bring expertise to the table, right? Then the career growth probably becomes a much easier conversation to have. But you also need to be careful that you don't actually end up compromising on, or rather, starting from scratch every time you move to a new domain, right? And the way to avoid that is to make it clear that you're bringing a different perspective to this whole problem set. So, to give you a concrete example, basically, if you look at the world of cloud centric resource optimization, right? So, we're talking about you're developing things in the cloud, but you want it to be memory optimized, you want it to be performance optimized, because the way you conserve resources is going to dictate how much money you make at the end of the day in the cloud story, right?
Right.
And someone who's worked on, let's say, mobile handsets has had to deal with the maximum amount of memory shortage and performance problems you can imagine, right? Because it's such a constrained setup that you're working in, and so your mindset is to do what is called frugal development, right? Like save every performance cycle that you can, use minimal memory. And this actually brings a very different perspective to the table. And so I would argue that if you are someone who is coming from the embedded systems world and is pitching for a role in the cloud space, you still have a very strong case to make about the perspective you bring and also the skills, the generic skills that are applicable across different domains. So I view it as a twofold problem. One part is just convincing the person hiring you that you're bringing this new perspective. And the second part of it is that you are individually able to leverage your existing skills while expanding your knowledge in a new area. So that's a gain for you as well in terms of growth.
Sure. And now I see, to, take a step back and look at what we spoke earlier. No wonder it gets difficult as the number of years of experience increases.
Absolutely. Yeah.
You know, there are different times in our career where we contemplate making changes to the areas that we work on. So, what are the key things you think people should keep in mind while making the choice?
So I think a few things to think through are definitely the amount of energy and enthusiasm you have. Because the moment you talk about moving into a new area or picking up a completely new technology, it has a very steep learning curve. So you need to be up for the challenge, right? And of course, the reward at the end of that is that you're going to have this adrenaline rush. You're going to be like super excited about learning something very new and getting a grip on it. The other part of it is also to be cognizant of the fact that it's not a traditional path where people just assume that you're an expert in an area because you've been in that area for a long time, right? You would need to actively make a case for the value that you bring to the table because it might not always be obvious to a person in a new field, right? And so it's a conscious choice that you should make whether you're up to doing that or you would prefer the more traditional approach. But I think one thing that I've at least personally experienced is that because you move through different technologies and different domains, you get used to wearing multiple hats and ramping up quickly on different things and gives you the confidence that you can learn anything given a certain amount of time. It also exposes you to people with very diverse backgrounds and very diverse ideas. So there is a lot of, I guess, diversity of thought that comes into play when you're moving across different domains. So if you're an entrepreneur or you plan to be an entrepreneur at some point, I would think that's a real asset.
That's a great summary, Ashwini. There are two things that I totally loved about what you said. I would say at least two of my favorite things. One was you said that you build the confidence to learn anything that comes your way. I think that's such an important thing to have as we think about our career, and also having the exposure to diverse thoughts. That's extremely valuable.
Hey Ashwini, it has been 3 years since our episode. What are you doing these days?
Hi, Deepa. It has been a while, right? The past 3 years have been pretty exciting for me. I stepped out of my comfort zone of building systems and networking software completely and joined an early stage startup called DevRev to build intelligent business process software. So I worked on cloud infrastructure initially and then moved on to learn, UI programming, Figma design to do a little bit of like UX work. I wrote technical marketing blogs. Then I worked in product management, interacting with potential customers, working towards a product market fit. I was also able to deep dive into vector databases and the whole generative AI and large language models. It was just a fantastic amount of experimenting, learning, wearing many hats. I really enjoyed interacting with the customers, and I just felt like for AI, I really wanted to be in a position to carefully define what to build and just obsess over why do you want to build something into a product, right? So after 15 plus years, just laser focused on, how do I build this? How do I make it efficient? I wanted to just learn a little bit more about the business dynamics and shift gears. So I joined Nutanix again 7 or 8 months ago, I'm going to say, to lead product management for our enterprise AI inferencing product. So in this role, I'm able to kind of leverage some of my engineering and systems background and expertise just to make a little bit better or more informed decisions. And I can obsess about product definition and customer interactions and just learn a lot more about the business strategy and the other surrounding areas. So that's what I'm doing right now. Outside of work, I was volunteering with an organization called Women Who Code and doing a bunch of sessions for them. Unfortunately, the organization had to shut down because of lack of funding earlier this year. And this really hit me hard. So this year, I decided to do some fundraising for a different organization that does great work. It's called Go Ladly. So please go check out Go Ladly.
So, Ashwini, thank you so much for spending time with us today. It was great having you and wishing you the very best for everything ahead.
Thank you so much, Deepa. I wish you all the best too.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please like and subscribe to our channel on YouTube or on any podcast platform. Follow us on LinkedIn at Through the Corporate Glass. You can leave us a comment on YouTube or send us feedback via our website, throughthecorporateglass.com. We would love to hear your feedback.